Good evening, everyone. My name is Paul Young. I'm just going to walk you through the Ontario debt. And the reason why I'm doing this is because the Liberal government under Kathleen Wynne and her predecessor Dalton McGuinty typically have swept the whole debt obligation underneath the table that it's, oh, whatever, right? They don't really take the debt issue as a very serious issue. And it's something, the reason why I'm doing this video, it's very important to me to get the facts out because Justin Trudeau has called Kathleen Wynne a great financial stewardess of the money in Ontario, and yet the debt levels and the expenditures and all that are not in line with his statement. So as you're casting your vote, you may want to take a hard look at Ontario, because Justin Trudeau will, if anything, will enable Wynne to continue down her destructive path in terms of Ontario's debt and just the overall spending issues. So let's look at the first graph. And the first graph shows you that since the Liberals took power in 2003-2004 range, basically our debt is continually grown. Yes, we've had a recession, but the recession typically ended in 2011, 2009, 2010. We are still, in terms of running annual deficits, around $10 billion a year. There has been no structural approach to kind of cutting the size of government down. The Liberal government is borrowing money just to meet their day-to-day operations. So it's a dangerous game right now because they're borrowing money to manage their cash expenses. But over time, all that does is add to more debt, and you have to pay that down. And that's a statement that you never hear from the Liberal Party of Canada. The other thing is you do not hear is the cuts that they're forcing on it. So if they move health care transfers, say the federal government gives 6% to the province, they're only giving 2% of that to healthcare and telling the hospitals how to run. So they're capping the money coming in. That's then forcing cuts because they have to do with reduced funding, and that either happens in education or as well as healthcare. Let's look at the debt service charge. Now, the only reason why you're seeing that it's almost equivalent, or it's been pretty consistent, is we're in a period of low interest rates. So therefore the government's been able to assume more debt because the interest rates have been lower. Now, basically how a government operates, it issues debt instruments. Those debt instruments have to be valuated. And how that works is bond rating agencies get involved. So this chart shows you a trend from 1996 to 2000 where basically Ontario rating was a AA rating. So that's a pretty solid rating. So basically what that means is a very healthy rating system that the bonds and the debt, the bond raters view the Ontario's debt. Now, this just kind of gives you a chart to just show you that anything like a AAA, AA negative, positive are still good ratings. Now, the difference between a AAA to a AA could be a marginal percent difference. And what I mean by that is that how bonds are rated, they're rated based on a bunch of assumptions that go into in terms of the bond yields. Those bond yields will basically be forced up in terms of the requirements by investors by their rating. So it may be a small percentage. It could only be maybe 1/4% or maybe 1/2 point that will impact those bonds on those yields. Now, 1/4 or 1/2 point will impact the cost of debt. That cost of debt will impact on the cash the government has to pay. So this basically, next chart shows you is the bonds and the yields, and what you can see here in Ontario's case is some of the long-term debt has a higher yield. So you're starting to see if that's a higher yield, that means the investors have asked for a higher demand. That higher yield also means a higher interest rate that will be paid on those bonds. Let's talk about the debt. Okay, currently right now in the last fiscal year 2013-2014, the new one hasn't been released yet, the Ontario government paid about $11.4 billion in interest payments at an effective rate based on their debt schedule of about 4.5%. Now let's stop there. That's low interest rates. We all know that interest rates eventually are going to go up. So even if the interest rates go up 1/4%, it will cost the government on an annual basis close to $670 million. So every 1/4 point the government has to rate interest rates go up, costs the government or costs taxpayers close to $700 million. So if it goes up 1/2 point, you're talking $1.2 billion. Now, in general, if you look at how we fund our government, If you look at that and look at the threshold there, okay, let's look at anything that's below 1.2 billion. Okay, you're seeing a particular department would have to be slashed. Or healthcare, for example, which is the biggest expenditure, it could see cuts. Because at some point you're going to have to deal with the debt like then the federal government did in the 90s to bring it down. I estimate, if you take a look at the debt, to bring it down back to the ratio where it was in terms of the percentage, is basically would have to be running surpluses of $10 billion a year for the next 5 years. You'd have to remove about $50 billion worth of expenses over that time. Well, we all know Kathleen Wynne isn't going to do that. She's leaving this problem to future governments, and whoever gets elected to replace her down the road will have to deal with this debt issue. She's not going to deal with it. And this is the things you need to bear in mind when you're voting NDP or voting Liberal, is that these two parties will support Kathleen Wynne. She's as an enabler. She will not fix her things because she believes Ottawa will just give her more money if she's basically gets the right government in power. The only person standing up to Kathleen Wynne is Stephen Harper.